Well, April is Jazz Appreciation Month, and while you may think of Louis Armstrong in New Orleans, we thought we'd go back a little earlier to tell a local story and highlight one of the pioneers coming from Missouri. We have Raffi Andonian with us this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And jazz is known as America's classical music.
Yes.
Because of all the different mixtures it pulls together, believe it or not.
Incredible. So can you talk to me a little bit about the origins of jazz music in the United States?
Well, it's exactly what it does. It pulls together these different cultures in the United States, especially European and West African. It does start in New Orleans. You mentioned New Orleans and jazz. That's where you have an amalgamation of different cultures, including from the Caribbean. But then it comes up the Mississippi River and starts to spread throughout various parts of the country, including in this region. Now, what's interesting about, I think, jazz, it develops over the course of the 19th and early 20th century. So there's different elements that influence it. For example, you have the band music or marching band music from the Civil War in the 1860s. That's pretty popular afterwards. So that brass feel, that brass sound. And then the blues, kind of the rhythm and the sort of soul to it is influenced. But most importantly, it's the ragtime music that's really popular in the late 19th century, which combines its classical and the West African old slave and church songs that are combining. That's what ragtime is. Those influences together create jazz.
So just that melting pot, just like we are in this country. So can you tell me a little bit about how Missouri has contributed to the development of jazz and the pioneers?
So when it comes up the Mississippi, it also goes to St. Louis, Kansas City, even Sedalia in Missouri. And there's a guy named Scott Joplin who's known as the king of ragtime. He's from right here in Missouri, where he's spending most of his time when he's a big hit. He plays at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. He plays at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904. And one of his most famous songs is The Entertainer, which I'll try to hum here from him. Let's see. It goes, Now that song is made popular again in the 1970s because there was a revival of Scott Joplin's work in the 70s. There was a movie it was called The Sting, which featured The Entertainer, what I just tried to sing. There also was an opera, which he not only wrote 40+ ragtime songs, but he wrote a ballet and he wrote 2 operas. One of them's lost, but the other one is still available. And that opera is known to be the first one by a black African-American composer, which is pretty cool to think about. So he was a huge hit in the 1890s, and he's the king of ragtime as he's known, and that is what develops. He's a big contributor to jazz, and it takes place right here when he's in Sedalia and in St. Louis, in these kind of going around Missouri, and that's when that big hit happens and goes around the country, and of course the revival in the 1970s. Now, I think of jazz as golden years, the 1920s, because it's kind of the culmination of the late 19th, early 20th century. He died just before the 1920s, so he didn't quite see that sort of full kind of, coming together, but he contributed, exactly.
Wow, incredible. Well, thank you so much for being with us this
morning. I just add one last thing, since we're in Missouri, I want to just one more thought, is that if people want to find out more and engage with Scott Joplin's work, they can go to Sedalia and they have the Scott Joplin Ragtime Festival that you can check out. And you can even go to Kansas City, the American Jazz Museum, or go to his house, the Scott Joplin Historic Home, which is a state park now. It's under the state park system in St. Louis. So there are multiple sites throughout Missouri. You can check them out, but you've got to check out the music festival.
Truly and great.
Really cool to engage with his music.
Be sure to check that out and stick around. We'll be right back.